The throne room of Dravenhold had seen kings crowned and wars declared, but it had never seen a moment quite like this one. The queen knelt on the cold granite at the foot of the executioner's stone, her wrists bound behind her back, her dark hair falling loose about her shoulders. She was beautiful in the way grief is beautiful, pale, unbroken, terribly still. The morning light slanted down through the high stained-glass windows and caught in the tears she refused to let fall. A hush had settled over the hall, the kind of hush that comes before a storm breaks, before a verdict lands, before steel finds its mark. At the far end of the hall, seated on the Alpha King's obsidian throne, was the Alpha King himself. Or so every soul in that chamber believed. The figure on the throne wore Alpha King Vesper's face, the same sharp jaw, the same gold-threaded eyes that had made nobles lower their gaze for 8 long years, the same broad shoulders draped in black and silver. But the soul behind those eyes was not Vesper. The soul behind those eyes was a woman named Ceressa, a human historian from a village 300 miles south, and she was trembling beneath the weight of a body that was not her own. She had not asked for this. She had not asked for any of this. But the axe was already in the executioner's hands, and the queen on the stone was the body she had woken up in 3 days ago, now with Vesper's furious soul locked inside it. And there was only one way this scene could end without every man and woman in that hall turning on their king. Ceressa rose slowly from the throne. The alpha power rolled off her skin like heat off iron. Oh, and the councilmen lowered their heads before she had even spoken. "Carry out the sentence," she said. Her voice did not sound like hers. It sounded like thunder held behind a man's teeth. The executioner lifted the axe. Across the hall, the queen lifted her face. The eyes that met Ceressa's were green as river glass and black with rage, and they belonged to a man who had ruled these wolves for almost a decade, and who was about to die on a stone in his own throne room, wearing the body of the woman he had condemned. The axe began to fall. 4 days earlier, Ceressa had been alive, awake, and entirely herself, and the worst thing in her life had been a headache from reading too long by candlelight. She was 28 years old, unmarried by choice, and employed as a junior archivist at the Grand Library of Orin, which was a grand name for a damp stone building at the edge of a village that nobody visited on purpose. She had short-cropped black hair that she kept tucked behind her ears, ink stains on her fingers no amount of scrubbing could lift, and a standing reputation among her colleagues for being, in their words, unnervingly stubborn about dead things. Ceressa loved dead things, or rather, she loved the history of them. She loved the wolves who had ruled the northern kingdoms 1,000 years before humans had built their cities, and she loved the witches who had lived alongside them, and she loved the strange, tangled, often ridiculous traditions both had kept. Wolf mating required the groom to mark the bride with a bite. Witches had sworn oaths with blood on bleeding hand. It was absurd. It was magnificent. It was the only thing in the world that made Ceressa smile. She would have been content to spend her whole life in that library, but contentment had never been the gift the gods had given her. Her father had been a blacksmith, a good one, the kind of man who spoke little and watched much. 3 years before, the new magistrate of Orin had begun seizing the homes of tenant families who could not pay the raised taxes, and Ceressa, being Ceressa, had written a pamphlet about it. She had not meant for the pamphlet to spread. She had only meant to put the truth on paper because truth on paper felt like truth made real. But the pamphlet had spread, and the magistrate had come looking, and her father had stood in the doorway of their house and said she was not inside even though she was, and when the soldiers had pushed past him, he had fought them, because that was the kind of man her father was. They had killed him on the threshold of his own forge. Ceressa had buried him in the churchyard behind the library. She had stopped writing pamphlets. She had stopped speaking to anyone who was not bound in leather and filed on a shelf. She had thrown herself into the history of wolves and witches because the history of wolves and witches did not require her to be brave, did not require her to speak, did not require her to lose anyone else. It was my fault, she had told herself, every morning for 3 years. I opened my mouth and he paid for it. So she kept it closed. She read. And on the night everything changed. She had been reading in the lowest archive of the library, where the air smelled of mildew and lamp oil and the slow, sweet rot of paper, when her hand had come down on a book she had never seen before. It was small, leather-bound. The cover was so worn the title had been sanded away by 100 years of handling. It was tucked behind a row of agricultural surveys, as if someone had put it there to be forgotten. Ceressa pulled it free and brought it to her lamp, and when she opened it, her breath caught. The pages were a map. Not a drawn map, an enchanted map, ink that shifted as the page was turned, lines that redrew themselves, a compass rose that spun slowly clockwise beneath her fingertips. She knew what it was. She had read about them in 3 different treatises. Humans in the old era had used such maps to travel to the shifters' kingdoms, back when the borders had been open, back when the 2 peoples had still spoken. It had been centuries since a working one had surfaced. Scholars had argued for generations that the enchantments had died with their makers. Ceressa laughed aloud in the empty archive. The sound startled her. She had not laughed in 3 years. She read for hours. The script was old, older than her grasp of it, but she traced each symbol with her fingertip and whispered the syllables under her breath. The enchantment required a rune, a specific sigil drawn on the traveler's palm, activated by blood or breath. She did not have the sigil. She did not have blood to spare. She was reading only to understand. But somewhere between the 10th page and the 20th, she began to feel strange. The lamp felt too bright. The air in the archive felt too thick. A sweet, metallic scent had risen from the pages, faint at first, then stronger, then overpowering, a scent like burned honey and old iron and something Ceressa had no word for. She tried to lift her head and found she could not. She tried to close the book and found that her fingers would not obey her. The rune, she thought, with the last clear thought she would have for some time. The rune was on the pages, painted into them. The scent filled her lungs, her vision went soft at the edges. The last thing she saw was the compass rose on the open page, spinning faster now, faster and faster until it was only a blur of gold. And then the lamp went out, and the archive went black, and Ceressa of Oren fell unconscious in her chair. She woke on silk. That was the first wrong thing. The blanket under her cheek was silk, and silk was not something Ceressa had ever slept on. Her bed at home was straw ticking under coarse wool. Her pillow was a folded cloak. This was cool and smooth and smelled faintly of lavender and something sharper beneath it, something that stung the back of her nose. Ceressa opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was vaulted stone, painted with a mural of wolves running beneath a red moon. Candles in wrought iron sconces burned along the walls. The bed was enormous, 4-postered, draped in heavy velvet the color of wine. There was a hearth the size of a small room, and in the hearth a low fire crackled. The shutters were closed, the air was warm and still. This was not the archive. This was not anywhere Ceressa had ever been. She sat up. Too fast. Her body felt wrong in a way she could not immediately name, the kind of wrong where a joint has been dislocated and settled back slightly crooked. Her hands came up to her face, and her hands were not her hands. The fingers were longer. The nails were clean. There was no ink under them. There was a pale ring of raw skin around the 3rd finger of her left hand, as if she had worn a ring there for a long time and recently torn it off. Her breath came short. Her heart, which was not her heart, a slower, stronger heart than hers, began to hammer. "No," she whispered, and the voice that came out was not hers either. It was lower, warmer. A woman's voice, but not the voice she had lived inside for 28 years. Ceressa scrambled out of the bed. Her legs were longer than she expected, and she nearly fell. She caught herself on one of the bedposts and stood there a moment, gasping, before she saw the mirror across the room. The mirror was tall and gold-framed, angled toward the bed. Ceressa crossed to it on feet that were not her feet, in a nightdress of white linen she had never owned, and when she stopped in front of it, she stopped breathing. The woman in the glass was beautiful. She was Ceressa's age, but where Ceressa was sharp and plain and ink-stained, this woman was soft and composed and lovely. Her skin was pale gold. Her hair was long and dark and fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Her eyes were river green. Her mouth was wide and unpainted. She was taller than Ceressa had been. She was curved where Ceressa had been lean. She was, by every standard Ceressa had ever read about or overheard, the kind of woman men wrote poems about and stabbed each other over. She was also crying. Ceressa lifted her hand, and the woman in the mirror lifted her hand. Ceressa touched her cheek, and the woman in the mirror touched her cheek. Ceressa opened her mouth, and the woman in the mirror opened her mouth. And the sound that came out of both of them was a small, cracked, disbelieving sob. This is not my body. The thought was not a thought. It was a scream inside her skull. This is not my body. This is not my face. This is not my voice. This is not my life. What is happening to me? What is happening? She spun from the mirror. Her eyes raked the room. The door. There. She ran to it, her bare feet soundless on the carpet, and she seized the iron handle and pulled, and it did not move. She pulled harder. She pulled until the muscles in her new, unfamiliar shoulder burned. The door did not move. It was locked from the outside. She pressed her forehead against the wood and breathed. Think, she told herself. Think. You are a scholar. You read. You think. Do that now. She turned slowly, forcing herself to look. On a small table near the hearth, a tray had been set. Bread, untouched. A wedge of cheese with the rind still on, untouched. A pear, browning where it had been sliced and then abandoned. A golden cup, tipped over on its side. Ceressa crossed to the table. She knelt. She lifted the cup. A few drops of liquid had pooled in the lip of the rim, dark and thick, almost black. She brought it to her nose, and the scent hit her, and she went cold all over. Burned honey. Old iron. That third scent she had no word for. The rune. It was the same. It was exactly the same scent that had risen from the pages of the leather-bound book in the archive at Orin. The scent that had filled her lungs and stolen her consciousness. Whoever had lived in this body before her had lifted this cup to her lips and swallowed it down, and then lain down on that great velvet bed to die. Ceressa set the cup back on the tray with hands that would not stop trembling. She sat on the edge of the bed. Her legs would not hold her. The breath went out of her in a long, shuddering rush, and she pressed the heels of her palms into her new, unfamiliar eyes and tried not to unravel. And then the memories came. They came not all at once, but like a tide. A slow, heavy roll of recollection that had nothing to do with her. A woman's childhood in a cottage by a birchwood. A mother who had smelled of rosemary and had sung at the loom. A father who had taught her how to read stars. A 17-year-old girl standing in the rain beside her mother's fresh grave, whispering, I did this, it was my fault, and then pulling something inside her chest shut, locking it, swallowing the key. Magic. The girl had locked away magic. The girl had been a witch. Her name was Talia. Talia had been 24 when she had met the Alpha King Vesper of Dravenhold on a trade road, and he had looked at her once and known her for his mate. And she had looked at him once and known the same, and for 4 years they had been everything to each other. She had been his anchor, his calm, saw the warmth that softened a king who had been raised on his father's fists. She had loved him. He had loved her back. She had kept her witchcraft a locked and buried thing, because in the wolf kingdoms the practice of magic was forbidden to any but the temple priestesses, and a witch queen would bring her king's head down with her own. But Councilman Corvin had known. Corvin had always known. He had watched her for years, patient as a spider, and when the time was right, he had forged letters, bribed servants, whispered into the right ears, and built around her a case for infidelity so complete that even Vesper had believed it. He had come to her in her chamber the night before her accusation, and he had told her, softly, smiling, that he knew what she was. That if she defended herself, he would expose her as a witch, and the council and the kingdom would turn on the king they already feared, and Vesper would lose his throne and his head. But if she went quietly, if she drank the rune in her cup and lay down and died with shame but not with treason, then the secret would die with her, and her king would live, and Vesper. Vesper had turned his back on her. Talia's memory of that moment came to Saressa like a knife. The throne room, the accusations, Talia's eyes searching her mate's face for any sign of faith, of trust, of the love she had spent 4 years being the living proof of. And Vesper, his jaw tight, his gaze sliding past her as if she were not there. Vesper had said nothing, had done nothing, had let them drag her from the hall. His mother had betrayed his father. His father had raised him with fists because of it, and when his council had told him his own mate had done the same, the boy inside the king had believed them, before she had even spoken. That, more than the accusation, had broken her. Talia had gone to her chamber. She had looked at the cup Corvin had left on her table. She had thought of dying publicly, of the axe, of her name becoming a curse in her husband's mouth. And she had lifted the cup, and she had drunk. Saressa came back to herself slowly, sitting on the edge of a bed in a locked room in a castle she had never seen, inside the body of a woman who had chosen to die rather than shame the man who had abandoned her. She was no longer crying. She was, in fact, very still. Very quiet. The kind of still Saressa became when something had made her angry in a way she did not yet have words for. "Talia," she whispered, and the borrowed voice shook. "Talia, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She looked at her borrowed hands. She curled her borrowed fingers into fists. "I don't know how I got here," she said aloud, to the empty room, to the woman who was no longer in it. "I don't know why the gods sent me into your body instead of letting you die. But I'm here, and I'm not you. And I'm not going to lie down and let them win." She drew a long breath, and it felt, for the first time, like her own. "I will find out who did this to you," she promised the silence. "I will make them answer. I swear it on my father's grave." The days that followed were quiet and slow and terrible. No one came. No one spoke to her. Twice a day a slot opened in the base of the door, and a tray of food was pushed through, and the old tray was collected, and the slot closed again. Saressa did not eat the first day. She did not trust it. On the second day, her borrowed body began to shake from hunger, and she ate the bread, nothing else. On the third day, she ate everything. She needed Talia's body to be strong. She spent the hours pacing, searching the room, memorizing the cracks in the stone, going over Talia's memories again and again, sorting them like documents in an archive, names, faces, allies, enemies, Corvin, always Corvin, the thin smile, the folded hands. "Die quietly, my queen, and you will save your king." On the morning of the fourth day, Saressa woke to the sound of boots in the corridor. Many boots. Armored, she rose from the bed. She did not bother to dress in anything but the white linen nightshift she had woken in. Talia had been denied her gowns, denied her jewels, denied everything but the clothes she had been meant to die in. And she crossed to the center of the room and stood there with her chin lifted. She thought of her father, dead on the threshold of his forge. She thought of Talia, drinking the cup so her king would live. "I am not going to die quietly," Saressa told herself. "Whatever happens in that hall, I am going to speak." The bolt drew back. The door of the chamber of the condemned Queen of Dravenhold groaned open on its iron hinges, and the king's guard, 8 of them, in black mail, their faces grim and their swords at their hips, filled the doorway. The captain stepped forward. His eyes, when they met hers, held no pity at all. Queen Talia? He said. His Majesty the Alpha King is waiting. It is time. The captain did not touch her. That, Ceressa thought, as she walked between the guards down the long stone corridor, was perhaps the only mercy left in the palace of Dravenhold. They did not chain her wrists. They did not push her. They walked her as a condemned queen and not as a prisoner. And she kept her chin lifted and her feet silent on the flagstones, and she did not let them see that her knees were shaking. The corridor smelled of old incense and colder stone. Torches burned in iron brackets at every 10th pace, and the flames bent backward as the guards passed, as if the fire itself were wary of them. They climbed a curving stair. They passed a row of tall windows that looked out over a courtyard she had never seen, where snow had fallen in the night and lay now in thin blue drifts against the walls. Servants in dark livery stopped in the corridors when she passed. Some bowed. Some turned their faces away. Ceressa felt the blow of it more than she had expected. They believe it, she thought, all of them. The great doors of the throne room rose at the end of the corridor. They were black oak bound in iron, and they were carved with the history of the kings of Dravenhold, battle upon battle, crown upon crown. The guards halted. The captain lifted his hand, and the doors were pulled open from within. A wall of sound and light hit her. The throne room was full. Nobles in furs and velvet lined the long carpet down the center of the hall, packed shoulder to shoulder along the walls, craning from the high galleries. Councilmen in black robes sat in a crescent of carved seats to the right of the throne. Somewhere a scribe was already writing. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet wool, and too many bodies pressed too close. And on the obsidian throne at the far end of the hall sat the Alpha King. Ceressa had seen him in Talia's memory. She had watched him through Talia's eyes in a dozen quiet moments, laughing over a cup of wine, sleeping with his arm flung across his mate's waist, standing at a window with his forehead against the glass. The man in the memory had been warm. The man on the throne was not. Vesper was broad in the shoulder and long in the leg, and he sat with the easy, lethal stillness of a wolf that has already decided how it will kill you. His hair was black and cut short. His skin was the color of old honey. His eyes were green, the same river green as the eyes in Ceressa's borrowed face, she realized with a small shock, as if the mate bond had matched them to each other. And those eyes fixed on her the moment she stepped into the hall. And they did not soften, and they did not waver, and they did not blink. He looked at her with disgust. Not fury, not heartbreak. Disgust. The expression of a man looking at a dish that had gone bad in his pantry. The expression of a man who had already buried his mate in the private rooms of his own heart, and was now waiting, patiently, for the body to catch up. Ceressa felt Talia's body recoil before she herself did. The mate bond. Talia's mate bond, still humming faint and bruised beneath the sternum of this borrowed chest, cried out at the sight of him. And Ceressa, startled by the force of it, and nearly stumbled. Oh, Talia, she thought. Oh, sweet girl. He broke you with that look, didn't he? She straightened her spine. They walked her down the long carpet. She kept her eyes on the throne. She had learned, in 3 years of mourning her father, how to walk through a crowd that believed the worst of her, and she walked now the way she had walked then, as if the crowd were the guilty party and she the judge. They halted her at the foot of the dais. The captain stepped back. The hall fell silent. Councilman Corvin rose from his carved seat. Ceressa had known him the moment she had entered. Talia's memories had made him vivid. A man of late middle years, thin, immaculate, with a narrow face and a narrower smile. His robes were black velvet trimmed in silver. His hands were folded in front of him in the manner of a priest. He did not look at the king. He did not need to. He had been the true power in this hall for longer than Vesper had worn the crown, and every man and woman in the chamber knew it. Queen Talia, Corvin began, and his voice was soft, almost gentle, the voice of a man reading eulogies. You stand accused before the council and the crown of high treason, of adultery, and of the betrayal of the sacred mate bond. The witnesses have been heard. The evidence has been weighed. The council has found you guilty." A murmur rolled through the hall. Corvin raised one thin hand, and the murmur died. "It is the right of the accused," he said, "to speak a final word in their own defense before judgment is passed. Your Majesty." His eyes flicked to hers. They were pale. They were kind. They were the eyes of a man offering a dying woman a last cup of water. And the water was poisoned, and they both knew it. "You may speak if you wish." He expected her silence. That was the thing Ceressa understood most clearly in that moment, as clearly as she had ever understood anything in her life. Corvin expected Talia to bow her head, to weep and say nothing. Corvin had built this entire machine on the certainty that the Queen would go to the block the way a good wife went to the altar. Quietly, beautifully, with her secret still locked behind her teeth. Ceressa lifted her head. "I am innocent," she said. Her voice rang, Talia's voice, low and warm, but Ceressa's cadence behind it. The cadence of a woman who had once written pamphlets, who had once stood in a village square and read aloud the names of families turned out of their homes. The words struck the stone of the throne room like a hammer on iron, and every head in the hall turned. Corvin's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. A small, flat flicker, the flicker of a man who has just heard a wrong note in a song he himself has composed. For the space of a single breath, his composure cracked. Ceressa saw it. She saw it, and she filed it away. Then his smile deepened. "My queen," he said, soft as silk. "I understand the terror of this moment, but to deny—" "I am innocent," Ceressa said again, louder now. "I have not betrayed my mate. I have not betrayed my king. I have not betrayed this kingdom. I stand before this council and I say it on my mother's grave. I did not do what I have been accused of doing, and whoever has built this case against me has built it on lies." The hall erupted. The nobles shouted. The councilmen half rose in their seats. Somewhere a woman screamed, and somewhere else a man laughed, and Corvin was shouting for order. And one of the older councilmen at the far end of the crescent was pounding his fist on the arm of his chair and demanding her head, and "let us be done with this." And another was on his feet insisting on her right to a fair hearing. And a third was shouting that she was a seductress, a manipulator, that she wanted only to use the king as she had always used him. And through it all, Ceressa stood at the foot of the dais with her chin lifted and her hands loose at her sides, and she did not move. On the throne, Vesper did not move either. He was watching her the way a man watches a door he thought he had locked begin to open of its own accord. His brow had furrowed the smallest degree. The disgust had gone still in his face, and something else was rising beneath it. Not softness, not yet, but attention. Ceressa met his eyes. For a long moment across the screaming hall, the two of them looked at each other. But something in her chest, in Talia's chest, began to burn. It was not just anger. It was anger channeled into something older and sharper, the accumulated grief and rage of a woman Ceressa had only known through memory and already loved. It was Talia's 4 stolen years. It was Vesper's betrayal. It was Ceressa's father lying dead on the threshold of his forge. It was the silent injustice Talia had endured for his mate. It all rose up her throat, and she opened her mouth to scream it, to howl at this hall full of wolves. And something else came out. Words. They were not hers. They were not in any language she knew. They came from somewhere below her tongue, from somewhere deeper than lungs, a cascade of syllables like water pouring over stone, old and liquid and impossibly heavy. She heard her own borrowed voice speaking them and did not understand them. She felt her borrowed mouth shape them and could not stop. The air in the throne room shivered. The torches bent. A cup on the councilman's long table rattled and fell on the stone, and no one moved to lift it. Corvin's face went white. "Stop her," he said. "Stop her, stop her." The last syllable left Ceressa's mouth. The world tilted. Her knees folded beneath her. She saw the carved stone of the dais rushing up to meet her, and then the world went black, and she was gone. At the same instant, across the hall, the Alpha King pitched forward from his throne and struck the granite floor face first and did not move. When Ceressa regained consciousness, she came back wrong. That was the first thing. The wrongness. The body she woke up in was not Talia's body. The weight of it was different. The size of it was different. Her shoulders were wider. Her hands, when she lifted them in front of her face, were the hands of a man, large-knuckled, calloused, with a gold signet ring on the smallest finger. Her chest was flat beneath the black tunic she was wearing. Her thighs, where her palms braced against them, were slabs of muscle she had no idea how to use. And there was something inside her, a presence, a second heartbeat beating alongside her own, patient and enormous and awake, a warmth that breathed when she breathed, a creature, a wolf. Ceressa, who had read about alpha wolves for 10 years, who had written 3 monographs on the nature of the wolf bond and the soul shape of the shifter, understood at once what had happened to her, and still could not understand it. She was in the body of the Alpha King. She was on the floor beside the throne. The healers were around her, 3 of them, their hands on her shoulders, on her chest, on her brow, and they were speaking urgently, rapidly, calling her, "Your Majesty," calling her "my king," trying to help her up. Across the hall, on the granite of the dais, another knot of healers was bent over another body. A woman's body. Talia's body. She understood, and she did not understand, and she could not breathe. And then, the woman on the stone opened her eyes. Ceressa saw them from across the room, green eyes in a pale face. And in those eyes, as they fixed on her own borrowed ones across the chaos of the throne room, there was not confusion. There was not grief. There was recognition. There was fury. There was the naked, appalled, uncomprehending rage of a king who had woken up in his own wife's body and could already taste what had been done to him. Vesper knew. Ceressa felt her new mouth. His mouth fall open. He knew. And she knew that he knew. And there was not a single soul in the hall who understood what was happening, except the 2 of them. She did the only thing she could think to do. She rose. The healers tried to help her. She brushed them off. She rose to her full height. Vesper's height, a head taller than anyone else in the room, and she felt the alpha power come up her spine like lightning finding ground, and for one long, electrified moment, she simply stood, and the hall fell quiet around her, the way a forest falls quiet when something larger than a wolf moves through it. "Oh," she thought, dazed. "Oh, this is what it feels like." It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. It was the most powerful thing Ceressa had ever held in her life, and she had held it for less than 3 heartbeats, and already she could feel how easily it could ruin a person. She looked down at the council. "Silence," she said. The word was quiet. It did not need to be loud. It rolled out of her on the back of Vesper's alpha presence, and every councilman in the crescent of seats bent his head, and every noble along the walls lowered their eyes, and the hall went so still she could hear the torches breathing. Corvin did not bow his head. He was staring at her. His thin mouth was parted. His pale eyes were searching her face, raking it. The way a jeweler examines a stone he suspects is counterfeit. He did not know what had happened. He could not know, not yet. But he knew that something in the king on the dais had changed, and a man like Corvin did not tolerate change he had not authored. Ceressa met his eyes and held them. "I see you," she thought, as coldly as she had ever thought anything in her life. "I see what you are, and you do not yet see what I am. That is going to be your undoing." Then, because she could not afford a single witness to suspect more than he already did, she turned her head and looked, for the first time deliberately, at the woman on the stone. "Bring the queen to her feet," she said. The guards obeyed. They lifted Talia's body, Vesper's soul, by the elbows and set her on her feet. He swayed. He caught himself. His new, unfamiliar legs nearly gave beneath him. Ceressa saw his jaw clench. She saw him try to draw up the alpha power he had worn like a second skin his entire life. Saw him reach inside himself for a wolf that was no longer there, because Talia had never had a wolf. Because Talia had been a witch who had locked her magic away and lived as a human woman, and saw the moment he understood what he had lost. He looked up at her. His eyes, Talia's green eyes, were wet with something that was not quite tears. Ceressa almost felt sorry for him. Then she remembered Talia drinking the cup. Talia lying down on the velvet bed. Talia curling into herself to die with dignity because the man on the throne had not given her the simple gift of his trust. Her almost pity cooled. "The Queen will answer the charges," Ceressa said, and she heard her own cadence inside Vesper's deep voice, and the strangeness of it nearly broke her composure. She held. "Councilman Corvin has read them. I have heard them. I wish to hear what she has to say." A murmur. Corvin's head came up sharply. "Your Majesty." "Let her speak," Ceressa said. Across the hall, on the stone, Vesper opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His fury was naked in his face. Ceressa watched him struggle with it. Watched the king inside the queen's body try to command a room the way he had commanded rooms for 8 years, and find that the body he was wearing had no authority in it. That the voice that came from his throat was small and shaking, that even his breath would not obey him. His silence stretched. Ceressa let it stretch. Then, because the council was watching, and because Corvin was already suspicious, and because there was only one way out of this hall that ended with both of them alive, she said the thing she had rehearsed 100 times in her cell and never thought she would have to speak. "Very well," she said. "If the Queen will not defend herself, the law is clear. Guards, take her to the stone." The hall drew a single, shocked breath. The guards moved. They took Vesper by the elbows. They walked him, dragged him at the end because the legs of Talia's body had begun to buckle, down the length of the dais toward the executioner's block at the center of the hall. The executioner stepped forward. He was a big man, bare-armed despite the cold, and he lifted from the rack beside him an axe with a crescent head polished to the color of a winter moon. Vesper's eyes were on Ceressa the whole way. She could feel them. She could feel his fury like a fist against her breastbone. She could feel Talia's mate bond humming beneath Vesper's sternum, still unbroken, still reaching for her across the hall. And she understood, with a cold clarity, that if the axe came down on that body, the bond would snap, and the king she was trying to save would die inside the queen she had not yet saved, and 2 souls would be lost in one stroke. "Say it," she thought, staring at him across the hall. "Say the word. Save your own life. I know it's in you." They brought him to the stone. They forced him to his knees. The executioner raised the axe, and Ceressa, on the throne, stood as still as carved stone with her heart hammering and her hands clenched at her sides, and she thought, "He won't. He's too proud. He'll let the axe fall out of pure. I am innocent." Vesper's voice, Talia's throat. The words cracked on the second syllable, and the hall went still. Ceressa closed her eyes for one heartbeat. She opened them. She made her face into stone. "I did not hear you," she said. "Say it again, Queen Talia. Louder, so that this hall may hear." The insult of it landed. She saw it land. She saw Vesper's face twist, saw the king inside him rear up at the humiliation of being made to beg on his knees in a body he had despised for 3 days. She saw the moment he understood what she was doing. She saw the moment he understood that he had done this, exactly this, to his own mate. Had forced Talia into a silence, a swallowing, a public unmaking. And she saw for the first time something crack open in his face that was not pride. He lifted his head. "I am innocent," he said, and this time he shouted it. And the shout echoed through the throne room and up into the rafters and down into the stones beneath their feet. "I am innocent!" The hall did not know what to do. The councilmen stared. The nobles stared. Corvin's face was the color of old parchment. Saressa let the silence hold a full breath longer than it needed to. Then she raised her hand. "Release her." The guards hesitated. The executioner lowered the axe. Corvin came half out of his seat. "Your Majesty, this is unprecedented. This is a confession in open court. A queen who has abandoned her dignity, who has insulted the throne by her very—" "I have heard her," Saressa said. Her voice was quiet. It did not need to be anything else. The alpha presence rolled out of her again, and Corvin sat, not because he meant to, but because his knees failed him. "She is my mate," Saressa said, and she felt the truth of it in her chest, in Talia's bond that had followed her into Vesper's body, and the words came out of her with a weight she had not planned. "She is my queen. She has claimed her innocence before this court, and I will not be the king who takes the head of his own mate before a single witness has been questioned under oath. Your Majesty, a full investigation will be opened." Saressa's gaze cut across the crescent of councilmen, and one by one they lowered their eyes. "Every witness, every letter. The queen will remain confined to the palace until that investigation is concluded. She will not leave these walls. She will not speak to the court. But she will live until I have satisfied myself of the truth." Corvin rose fully now. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice had gone very smooth and very soft. "Forgive me, but the kingdom is watching. The council has already found her guilty. To reverse that judgment on the floor of the throne room, without warning, without counsel." Saressa turned her head slowly to look at him. "Councilman Corvin," she said. He stopped. "You are weeping more than the bereaved," she said. "If anyone in this hall has cause to cry for the queen, it is the man she has wronged. And yet he has ordered the investigation. And you who have been her accuser, her prosecutor, her witness, and her judge, you stand here and insist that I kill her faster. Why is that?" The hall went very, very quiet. Corvin's mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. I only mean to say—" "I have heard what you mean to say." Saressa's voice went cold. "You are dismissed, all of you. The court is adjourned." They went. They did not want to go, but an alpha command from a king who had just humiliated his senior councilman in open court was not a thing any of them was fool enough to question on the spot. They filed out in silence. The nobles, the guards, taking Vesper with them. And Saressa said, not looking at him, "The queen to my private chamber. I will question her myself." And the guards bowed and obeyed. Corvin was the last to go. He stopped at the door. He turned. He looked at Saressa on the throne, and for a long moment he simply looked. The way a man looks at a map he thought he had memorized that has begun, subtly, to change its coastlines. "Your Majesty," he said softly. "Are you quite well?" "Never better, councilman," Saressa said. He bowed. He left. The great doors of the throne room closed behind him, with a low, final boom. Saressa sat alone on the obsidian throne, in a body that was not hers, with a wolf she did not know how to hold pacing inside her chest. And she let out, at last, the breath she had been holding since they had dragged her out of the chamber of the condemned queen that morning. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs until they stopped. Then she rose from the throne, and she walked toward the private chamber where a furious king in a broken woman's body was waiting for her. Vesper stood in the center of his own chamber in Talia's body, and the sight of it struck her differently than she expected. Not absurd, the way she might have anticipated, but painful, because he was wearing it wrong. He held Talia's frame with a rigid, coiled tension that Talia had never used, shoulders pulled back, chin high, jaw set against the particular vulnerability of being smaller than he was accustomed to. He was trying to take up space the way his body was not built to take, and instead he only looked like what he was, a man who had lost his armor and was pretending otherwise. "Who are you?" Not a question. The flat, categorical demand of someone who was used to questions being unnecessary. Saressa looked at him steadily. "I am trying to save your life." That, he said, his voice strange and diminished in Talia's register, is not an answer. It's the only one that matters at the moment. He moved toward her, and she felt the instinct of the body she wore, the alpha recognition, the ancient pull of the mate bond that lived in the blood and did not care about circumstances, that reached toward the person it had chosen with the blind persistence of something that predated reason. She felt it in her bones and locked it down the way she had been locking things down her entire adult life, which was to say, with considerable effort and minimal grace. "You are not Talia," he said. He was close now, close enough that she could see the precise shade of his eyes. Talia's eyes, dark and deep and currently burning with a fury that looked foreign on that face which Ceressa had come to know through 4 days of mirrors and memories and the particular sadness of inhabiting someone else's grief. "I know my mate. I know the way she stands, like the way she looks at me even when she is trying not to." Something moved in his expression, something she suspected he would have preferred to keep hidden. "You look at me like you are studying me." "I am studying you," Ceressa said. Something in his face shifted dangerously. "You dare." "I dare considerably." She did not raise Vesper's voice. She had discovered that she did not need to. The body did the work on its own. Something in the resonance, the alpha authority that lived in the chest cavity and radiated outward like heat from a forge. She had spent 28 years learning to make herself heard in rooms that had decided not to listen. She had never had a voice like this one. "You were about to execute your mate for a crime she did not commit, because a man who wants your throne handed you a story that confirmed your worst fear, and you did not stop to question whether the story was true." His jaw tightened. "You know nothing about—" "I know everything about it." She held his gaze. "I have her memories, Your Majesty. All of them. I know about your father. I know what he did to your mother and what he did to you afterward, when the grief curdled into something meaner. I know that when Corvin brought the accusation to you, you did not investigate it because some part of you, the part your father built, was already waiting for betrayal, was already certain it would come." The silence this time was different. She watched him absorb it, watched the fury he was wearing begin to develop cracks, not softening, nothing so simple as that, but fracturing along lines that had always been there, underneath the stone surface he had spent a lifetime constructing. "How does it feel?" Ceressa said, and her voice was quieter now, not soft but genuine. "To be condemned for something you did not do?" He said nothing. "To stand in a hall full of people who have already decided, and know that nothing you say will change the verdict they walked in with?" She watched his face. "To have the person who was supposed to know you best look at you like you are a stranger?" She saw it. The thing she had said land somewhere it was not expected to go. The brief, unguarded moment before the stone came back up. "There is a conspiracy," she said, giving him something to hold instead of the wound she had just pressed. "Corvin knows Talia is a witch. He has been using it as leverage, die quietly under the infidelity charge, or he destroys you both by revealing what she is." She watched his eyes. "He wants your throne. The infidelity charge was never about Talia. It was about destabilizing you, removing your anchor, and leaving you volatile enough to be managed. You are harder to manipulate when she is beside you. She makes you—" She paused, reaching for the right word. "Human." Something crossed his face that she catalogued without comment. "She knew," Ceressa continued. "She knew what he had threatened. And she said nothing to you because she believed, correctly as it turned out, that you would not choose her." A pause. "So she chose to die with her dignity rather than her secret." The chamber was very quiet. Vesper moved to the window. He stood with his back to her, Talia's back, narrow and straight, dark hair loose around her shoulders, and looked out at the gray sky over the mountains. She let him. She had learned, in years of sitting in archives with scholars who needed to think, that some processing happened in private, even in company, and the kindest thing was to allow it. "What do you need from me?" he said finally. Cooperation. She moved to stand beside him, not too close. The view was extraordinary, gray and vast. Corvin suspects something has changed. He was watching me in court today, and he is not a man who leaves questions unanswered. No, Vesper agreed quietly. He is not. I need you to behave as Talia would, confined, grieving, quiet. It will not be comfortable. She glanced at him. You will need to be smaller than you are accustomed to. A muscle in Talia's jaw worked. And you will behave as me. I will behave as a king who has chosen investigation over execution. But she did not yet know that in a room 3 corridors away, Councilman Corvin was already summoning his most trusted man, already writing a note on a strip of black paper, already beginning the careful, patient work of arranging the death of a queen whose reprieve he had never planned for. By moonrise, a knife would be at the queen's throat. The knife came at the 3rd hour after moonrise. It did not come for Ceressa. She was awake when it happened. She had not truly slept since the swap. And the body she was wearing did not want sleep the way a human body wanted it. The wolf beneath her ribs restless and pacing through the long, quiet hours of the palace. She was at the long table in the Alpha King's private chamber, with a stack of council records across her knees and a cup of watered wine at her elbow. And the fire had burned low, and the night was so still she could hear the stones of the castle breathing. And then, she could not. The stillness broke. It broke in a way she felt before she heard, a small wrongness in the air 3 corridors away, a shift in the weight of the palace that the wolf inside her registered half a heartbeat before her mind did. Her head came up. The cup in her hand did not move. She was already listening. A sound. Faint. A boot on stone where no boot should have been. Then a second sound, sharper. The unmistakable scrape of a blade drawn from a sheath in a corridor where no blade was supposed to be carrying. Then a third. A grunt. Short and hard. The sound a man makes when a fist finds his ribs. The corridor of the Queen's confinement chamber. Ceressa was on her feet before she knew she had stood. The records spilled. The cup shattered. She was across the room and through the inner door, and into the corridor at a full run, and the wolf inside her had come awake all at once, and the alpha power was rising up her spine like lightning finding ground, and she ran with Vesper's long stride through the dark palace with her heart hammering and a single thought hammering louder than her heart. He must not die. She rounded the corner into the Queen's corridor. 2 of the guards were down. 1 was still. 2 still, his throat a wet black line in the torchlight. And the other was on his knees with one hand pressed to his side, and the other still locked on the wrist of a man in black leather, who was trying, with the patient strength of a huntsman finishing a kill. A 3rd guard was on his feet, sword drawn, circling warily. But he was young, Ceressa saw. He was young. He had the shape of a man who had never been in a real fight before tonight. And the assassin was going to put him down in the next breath or two. The door of the Queen's chamber stood half open. Inside it, Ceressa could see the edge of him through the gap. Vesper had come off the bed and had put his back to the stone between the hearth and the door, and he was holding a fire iron in both of Talia's hands. And his face was the face of a king preparing to die on his feet, in a body he could not fight with. The assassin's knife came free of the kneeling guard's grip. Ceressa opened her mouth. The sound that came out was not a word. It was not a roar either, not this time. It was colder than a roar. A low, flat, impossibly heavy thing that rolled down the corridor like a wave of black water and hit every living body in it at once. The kneeling guard's eyes rolled back in his head. The young guard dropped his sword and clapped his hands over his ears. The assassin, the lean, plain, patient man Corvin had paid in old coin, went rigid from the crown of his head to the soles of his boots, and then he went down. He went down hard. Face first, his knife skittered across the flagstones, his hands slapped the floor and stayed there. Splayed, shaking, because Ceressa's Alpha Command had told them to stay there. And Ceressa's Alpha Command was not a thing a human body could disobey. She crossed the corridor in 4 long strides. She put her boot on the back of his neck. He did not move. He could not. She stood over him with her breath coming hard and her pulse thundering in both throats, hers and the wolf's, and she looked up at the door of the Queen's chamber and met Vesper's eyes across it. He lowered the fire iron. He did not speak. He did not need to. His face said everything. The white shock, the held breath, the slow, painful gratitude of a man who had understood, in the last 5 heartbeats, that he had come within a knife's breadth of dying in a body no one would have wept for. "My queen?" Saressa said, loud, for the corridor, for the guards running now from the far end of the passage with their torches bobbing. "The queen is unharmed. Secure this man, alive, not a mark on him beyond what I have already put there. Fetch Councilman Marrow. Fetch Commander Hale. Move." They moved. They lifted the assassin from beneath her boot. They dragged him down the corridor. They carried the dead guard with a gentleness that Saressa, even in that moment, marked and was grateful for. Someone brought a cloth for the wounded guard's side. Someone else was already running for a healer. In less than a minute, the corridor was full of people, and in the middle of all of them, Saressa stood with her hands shaking at her sides and her borrowed heart still slamming against her borrowed ribs, and she did not look at Vesper again until every other eye in the hall had turned somewhere else. When she did look at him, he was leaning against the doorframe of the Queen's chamber. He was very pale. She crossed to him. She did not touch him. There were still too many eyes. But she stood close enough that no one else would hear. "Are you hurt?" she said low. "No, he sent a knife." Vesper said, "To this chamber, to me." "Corvin wants you dead," Saressa said gently. "He didn't expect the Queen to speak up. He believes killing you will hide the truth." Vesper's laugh was short and ugly. "Then he is a worse traitor than I thought him." "Yes." "Then we have him." Saressa looked at him. The fire had sunk low. In its light, Talia's face was gold at the edges and shadow at the center, and the man inside it was all king. Not yet," she said, "but soon. Sit. We have work to do before the sun comes up." They did not sleep. The huntsman, questioned through the rest of that night in the small stone room beneath the council chambers, broke before the 3rd bell. He had been paid in old coin by a man whose face he did not know, but whose voice he could recount. He had been told to enter by the broken western shutter, which, when examined, proved to have been broken from the inside in a careful, unrushed hand, and he had been paid a separate, smaller sum for his silence afterward. Corvin's name was not on his tongue, but Councilman Marrow, who was old and thin, and had served 3 kings, and had never once liked the man in the black robes with the silver trim, heard what the huntsman did not say, and understood. By dawn, they had a list, not of assassins, of allies. Corvin did not work alone. He had never worked alone. There were 6 councilmen whose votes he had been carrying for years, 2 captains of the southern garrisons who owed him their commissions, a priestess of the temple who had been receiving gold she did not earn, and a pair of merchants in the lower city whose warehouses had been storing things warehouses did not usually store. Saressa spread the list on the table in the Alpha King's private chamber. Vesper read it twice. When he looked up, his mouth had gone into a line that Saressa did not yet know him well enough to read. "All of them," he said. "All of them." "How?" "Quietly, one at a time. We pull the smaller threads first, the merchants, the captains, and we do it over 3 weeks, not 3 days. We give Corvin no single night to run. We make him watch his web thin around him and wonder which strand will break next, and we do not move on him until he has no strand left." Saressa tapped the parchment. "He is a patient man, Your Majesty. We are going to be more patient." 3 weeks, Vesper said. His jaw worked. "I am confined in this chamber for 3 weeks. You will be alive for 3 weeks. That is the price I am asking you to pay." He breathed out, long. He nodded. And so it began. The 3 weeks that followed were the strangest of Ceressa's life, and she would remember them, later, in a light that did not quite match the memory of any other span of days. By day, she sat in the Alpha King's council chamber and listened to grain reports, and tax reports, and border reports, and she learned, with the particular greedy speed of a scholar who has been handed a primary source, how a wolf kingdom was governed. She listened to Councilman Marrow. She listened to Commander Hale. She watched Corvin most of all. She let him see a king who was tired, who was grieving, who had perhaps been less steady since the incident in the throne room, but who was still, fundamentally, the man Corvin believed he knew. She let him relax. She did not relax. By night she went to the Queen's confinement chamber, alone, with a guard on the outer door, and she sat with Vesper in the long, quiet hours when the palace slept, and they spoke. They spoke about everything. The first night they spoke of Corvin, only of Corvin, and it was the talk of 2 commanders in a tent before a battle. By the second night they were speaking of the council, the captains, the old alliances, and by the third they were speaking of things Ceressa had not meant to speak of. Vesper, sitting cross-legged on the bed in the white shift, turning Talia's wedding ring over in Talia's hands, had said, quite suddenly, "My father broke my collarbone when I was 9. Ceressa had looked up from the records. "He broke it," Vesper said, "because I had asked my mother a question about her lover. I had not meant to ask it. I had not known he was her lover. I had only thought the man was a kind man because he had given me an apple once, and I had said so at the table, and my mother had gone white, and my father had watched her go white. And that night he came into my room, and he put his hand around my shoulder, and he—" Vesper stopped. He turned the ring. "He did not want to teach me not to speak. He wanted to teach her not to, but my shoulder was what he had in his hand." Ceressa did not say anything. There was nothing to say. "I have not told Talia that," Vesper said. "You should." "When I tell her," he said slowly, "I will not be telling her to explain myself. I have been explaining myself to her for 4 years. I have been using the boy in that bedroom as a shield, and I have been making her carry it, and I did not see that I was doing it until this week." He looked up. His eyes were wet. "When I tell her, it will be because I want her to know me, not because I want her to forgive me." "Good," Ceressa said quietly. "You have done this," Vesper said, "to me. Whatever else you have done this. You did it. I only held up the mirror." "Who are you?" he said, not for the first time, and this time she felt it. She felt for the first time that she could answer. She told him. She told him everything. She told him her real name, about the library at Oran, and the pamphlet, and her father on the threshold of the forge. She told him about the leather-bound book and the rune painted into its pages. She told him about waking up in Talia's bed and not knowing whose face was in the mirror. She told him about the vow she had made in an empty chamber to a woman she had never met. When she was finished, the fire had burned down to embers, and Vesper was looking at her with an expression she could not read. He rose from the bed. He went to the sideboard. He poured 2 cups of the dark honey wine that the wolves of Dravenhold drank when they wanted the night to be longer than it was, and he came back. And he handed her one, and he kept one. "To your father," he said, "who raised a woman who speaks." "To yours," Ceressa said, "who did not stop you from becoming a man who learns." He huffed a laugh, small and surprised. They drank. "If we get her back," Vesper said. He stopped. He started again. "When we get her back, I will not waste her again. I swear it on whatever you wish me to swear it on. I have seen now what she carried for me. I will not ask her to carry it a day more than she chooses." "Swear it on her," Ceressa said. "Nothing else is worth swearing on." "On Talia," Vesper said. "I swear it." Ceressa raised her cup. "Witness," she said. They drank the rest of the wine in silence, and the fire burned out, and neither of them moved. And when Ceressa walked back to her own chamber through the dark corridors of the palace, she understood that she had made a friend she was going to have to leave. They took Corvin on the 19th day, By then the threads had fallen one by one in the quiet, patient way Saressa had designed. The merchants in the lower city had been arrested for the tax fraud they could no longer hide. The two southern captains had been recalled for reassignment, and, on the road, had been relieved of certain letters they had been carrying. The temple priestess had been summoned to an audit of her accounts, and had broken inside an hour. 2 of the 6 councilmen, confronted with evidence they could not deny, had turned on the other 4 in exchange for their lives. By the morning of the 19th day, Corvin sat alone in the council chamber, with nothing beneath him but the chair he was sitting in, and that morning, Saressa, from the throne, ordered his arrest on the floor of the full court. He did not struggle. He looked at her, at the king on the obsidian throne, for a long moment, and the look in his pale eyes was not fear. It was something worse. It was the look of a man who had finally, at last, seen the map redraw itself and understood what he had missed. They took him to the cells. The trial came 2 days later. It was public. It was full. Every noble in Dravenhold had come for it. Saressa sat on the throne in the body of the king, and she read the charges herself, in her own cadence through his voice, and she did not spare a single one of them. "You conspired to frame the Queen of Dravenhold," she said, and her voice carried to the farthest stone of the hall. "You forged evidence. You bribed witnesses. You drove her, through threat of exposure of a truth that was not yours to hold, to drink a poison meant to take her life in silence. When your plot faltered, you sent an assassin into the confinement chamber of the Queen. You meant, by that stroke, to end your Queen's life. You meant, by the months of your work, to take the throne you were trusted to advise, and to rule through its vacancy. For these acts, you and your allies stand condemned as traitors to the crown, to the council, and to the people of Dravenhold." She paused. The hall waited. "History," she said, and Vesper, seated at the king's right in the guise of the confined, newly pardoned queen, lifted his head at the word, "is a long record of what happens to kingdoms that banish their traitors instead of burying them. Banishment does not end a man like Corvin. It only sends him somewhere new to weave the same web. Mercy, in the face of a traitor who does not repent, is not mercy. It is a debt paid by the next generation of the kingdom's children. I will not sign that debt." She stood. "The sentence is death," she said. "For Corvin, for his 6, for the captains and the priestess. It will be carried out at sundown. The council is dismissed." It was carried out at sundown. Saressa watched from the high window of the Alpha King's private chamber. She did not go down to the courtyard. She had ordered enough deaths for one lifetime, and she did not need to watch them landed. When it was done, she turned from the window, and Vesper was standing at the hearth with a cup of wine in his hand, and he held it out to her without speaking, and she took it. "Tell me," he said. "Ask. Why all of them? Why not the banishment? I would have signed banishment. I told the court why. Tell me." She drank. She looked into the fire. "Because you don't kill a snake from the tail. If you want it gone, you take off the head." She turned the cup in her hands. Corvin would have come back. His allies would have come back. And some of them would have repented, and some of them would not. And the ones who did not would have taught themselves, in banishment, how to come back with better help. I would not leave that inheritance to your son when you have one. I would not leave it to Talia." Vesper looked at her a long moment. "You are a hard woman," he said. "I am a historian," Saressa said. "We read the same stories twice." He laughed. It was not a large laugh, but it was a real one, and it was the first time she had heard it. The priestess came on the 23rd day. Her name was Izine, and she was old, not frail the way an oak is old. She wore the gray robes of the temple, and her hair was white and braided down her back. And when she stepped into the Alpha King's private chamber and looked at Saressa on the long couch, she stopped where she stood and tilted her head, the way a bird tilts its head at a thing that is not quite what it seemed. "Ah," Izine said softly. "Yes, there you are." You know, Saressa said, I felt it the day it happened. I could not say it aloud. I was waiting to be sent for. The old woman smiled. You have held his body well, daughter. You have held his throne better. I would not have guessed the spell could take so true a root in a soul not born to it. Can you reverse it? I can. Today? Today. Vesper came in from the inner chamber. He had been told. He stood in the doorway in the white linen shift, and Izine looked at him. And her old eyes softened the way eyes soften when a long-expected child walks into a room. My king, she said, welcome home. He could not speak. He only nodded. Izine set her satchel on the long table. She brought out a small stoppered vial of dark liquid, the rune, brewed fresh, adjusted, and a bowl of salt, and a length of red cord, and a knife the length of Saressa's thumb. I must prepare the draft, she said. It will take an hour. You, both of you, should speak what you wish to speak while the work is done. The spell will not leave a memory in either body of what was said between you in these final hours. That is its mercy and its cruelty both. She bent to her bowl. Saressa looked at Vesper. Vesper looked at Saressa. For a moment, neither of them moved. I want you to know. He stopped, started again, in the way she had come to recognize as him choosing words with unusual care. What you have done here, what you did for her, for me. He was quiet for a moment. I was not. I am not accustomed to receiving something I did not earn. You should be, she said. Talia gave you things you hadn't earned for 4 years. It is more or less the nature of love, from what I understand of it. I would suggest getting more comfortable with it before she comes back. She deserves a man who can receive her as well as he protects her. Another silence. I promised her, he said. In the memories. I know she cannot hear me, but I promised. That I would not take her for granted. That I would look into things before I believed them. That I would... He paused. Be worthy of what she gave. Saressa said nothing. Then he crossed the room, and he put his arms around her, and he held her. It was the first time, in 23 days, that he had touched her. I do not want you to go, Vesper said, against the shoulder of the body he had lived in his whole life. I want you to stay. I know I cannot ask it, but I want you to know that Talia would have loved you. I know her. I know this. She would have looked at you and she would have said sister and she would have meant it. Thank you, Saressa whispered. If there is a way back, he said. In your own body, if the gods allow it, come back to us, do you hear me? If the gods will it, she said, I will find my way. He held her a moment longer, and then he let her go. She went to the long table while Izine worked. She took a sheet of the king's own paper and a pen, and she wrote. Talia, she wrote, you do not know me. I am not sure when you read this that you will entirely believe it. I am not sure I entirely believe it, and I lived it. I spent 23 days in your body, in your life, in a marriage that had been breaking from the outside in. I want you to know that what I saw, what I felt through your memories, through the bond, through the remarkable and specific grief of being a person who loves someone who has stopped looking, was not weakness. It was not failure. It was the cost of being braver than the people around you knew how to understand. You did not deserve what was done to you. You deserved someone who looked and found the truth before the truth had to fight its way out on its own. I hope you will find, when you return to your life, that some of that has been corrected. I hope the man waiting for you is closer to the one you always believed he could be. I have done my best with what I had to work with, which included, I will confess, a significant amount of stubbornness and an embarrassing quantity of historical knowledge that turned out to be more practically applicable than I had ever expected it to be. One thing I ask of you, do not shrink. Not for the court. Not for the council. Not for anyone who believes that a woman who makes herself smaller is easier to love. You are not easier to love when you are smaller. You are only easier to overlook. There is a difference, and it is important, and you deserve to know it. I hope one day that I will meet you, in my own body, with my own voice. I would like to tell you that I saw myself in you, and that seeing you gave me back a piece of myself I had thought I had buried with my father. If the gods allow it, I will come. If they do not, remember that a stranger you have never met has loved you across a distance you cannot measure. That is a thing worth carrying. Yours, Saressa of Orin. She folded the paper. She sealed it with the king's ring, pressed into a drop of dark wax, and she placed it on the pillow of the queen's bed, where Talia would find it when she woke. Then she turned to Izine. "It is ready," the old priestess said. Izine handed her the vial. Saressa took it. Her hand did not shake. Vesper stepped forward one last time. He did not embrace her again. He took her hand instead, and he pressed it to his forehead, Talia's forehead, in the oldest gesture of a wolf to a sovereign he had chosen, and he held it there a long moment before he let her go. "Drink," Izine said softly. Saressa drank. The taste was burned honey and old iron, and the third thing she still had no word for. The room tilted. The floor came up. She heard Vesper's voice saying her name, and Izine's voice saying, "Peace, daughter, peace." And then the lamp inside her borrowed skull went out, and Saressa of Orin slid sideways out of the body of a king and out of the kingdom of Dravenhold and into the long dark. She woke to the smell of rosemary. The bed under her was straw ticking. The blanket over her was coarse wool. The hands she lifted in front of her face were her own, small, ink-stained, and Saressa of Orin, 28 years old and junior archivist at the Grand Library, laughed until she cried. A healer came. Then an older woman who introduced herself as the herb wife of a cottage 2 days north of Orin, where the patrol had found Saressa unconscious in a coach no one could explain, and had carried her in, 2 months past, for the gods' own reasons. 2 months, Saressa said. 2 months, dear. You have been under a sleep that was not a sleep. We kept you warm. We did not know most days whether you would wake. You came back on your own, as if something far away had finished, and let you go. Something far away had finished, Saressa said, smiling. Yes. In a palace 300 miles to the north, on a morning of new snow, a woman woke in a velvet bed with the taste of burned honey on her tongue and a sealed letter on her pillow. She blinked at the ceiling. The wolves on the mural were running under the red moon. Vesper was sitting in the chair beside the bed. His head was in his hands. His shoulders were shaking, silently, the way the shoulders of men shake when they have wept a long time and do not wish to be seen. Izine had reversed him back to his body after Saressa had gone. "Vesper?" Talia whispered. His head came up. She had never, in 4 years, seen her mate look at her the way he looked at her in that moment, as if she were water and he had been walking in a desert and had not known how thirsty he had been. He did not move. He did not dare. He was waiting for her to tell him whether she would have him. Talia, in whose last memory was of a cup of dark poison and a chamber where the door had closed behind her husband's back, looked at the man by her bed, and she saw, without yet knowing how, that the man in the chair was not the man who had turned his back on her. He was the man who had come out the other side of that room, the man who had learned whatever he had needed to learn, the man who had somewhere been taught. She lifted the sealed letter from her pillow. "Who is Saressa of Orin?" she said. Vesper made a small sound. It was half a laugh and half a sob. "Come here," Talia said quietly. "Come here, husband. Tell me everything." He came. He told her everything, and she read the letter, and she read it again. And when she was done, she held it against her chest for a long time without speaking. And then she said, and very softly, to a stranger who had lived inside her skin, and who had given it back to her cleaner than she had left it, "I hope I meet you one day, sister. I hope you find your way to us. You have a room in this house already." Saressa stayed a week with the herb wife. She ate. She slept. She walked in the small garden at the back of the cottage and felt the shape of her own hands in her own pockets. When she was strong enough to travel, she took the coach south. and she went home to Oren, and she went, the very first day, back to the library. The lowest archive smelled of mildew and lamp oil. Her chair was where she had left it. The lamp on the table had been refilled. And there, on the floor beneath the chair where it had fallen from her hand 2 months ago, was the leather-bound book with the sanded cover. Ceressa knelt. She picked it up. The pages were quiet now. The compass rose did not turn. Whatever ink had stained its paper with a rune of travel had dried, or slept, or moved on. She did not know if she would ever find the second half of the enchantment. She did not know if the gods were going to be kind. She did not know if in 10 years she would stand at the gate of Dravenhold with her own face and her own voice, and be recognized by a woman who had only ever known her through a letter. But she put the book in her bag, and she walked out of the archive with her head up, and the snow was falling on Oren. And somewhere very far to the north, a wolf king was sitting with his wife's hand in his. And the kingdom was quiet. And the history of it was still being written. And Ceressa of Oren, historian, daughter of a blacksmith, and stranger who had saved a throne, went out into the evening with the weight of a future in her bag. And she smiled. Thank you for listening. If you loved Ceressa, and Talia, and the king who learned, if your heart ached for them, then do me one small kindness before you go. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment and tell me which moment broke you, because I read every single one, and your words are what keep these stories coming.